It's August 20th, 2020, and I have been a little behind on my videos because a couple of weeks ago my old cat died. He was with me for 18 years, and if you've ever had an animal that you had a special bond with, then you understand where my heart and mind have been. Grief is tough, no matter how it comes to you. But yesterday, I got his ashes back, and so he's home again. And it gave me some kind of closure, but I think I'll always miss him. The other cats are fine. They're young and healthy, so I hope that we don't have to go through anything like this for quite a while yet. But I do need to get back to work, and I'll show you what I've been doing. And then I will finish that squash video, which should come up after this one. So I finally found out what that clump of grassy looking flowers is. It appears to be an allium. It is going to start blooming now that all of the green is gone. And it didn't bloom last year, so I had no idea that that's what it was. And they're going to be very pretty because my neighbor's next door is already blooming, and I will update you on that whenever I see them come out fully. So in the last video I told y'all that I'm about to tear up this pumpkin patch, and I have started doing that. What I've decided to do is cut off all the dead and dying and powdery mildew vines and leave what's green, if it looks healthy, just to see if it'll grow anything more. If it dies, I didn't lose anything, and if it makes another pumpkin, great. So here's what I've done so far. It's looking pretty empty. This one has decided to head for the road. It's in the yard, but it did have a pumpkin on it, which I just cut. It is that white pumpkin right there. And the one next to it there is still on what's left of the vine, and it's getting ripe, so that will be harvested pretty soon. And that over there is the pile just from about the first fourth of this, maybe a third. Several vines in there, lots of leaves. Few weeds. There weren't as many weeds as I expected, but there were a few. You can also see that the melons have encroached. The grass between the beds is getting really tall, so once I get these vines cleared out, I'm going to get that grass cut down, maybe dug out. I'm not sure yet what I'll do as far as getting it out of there, but once it's out of there, I'm planning on putting some more of the weed barrier fabric down. I do have some left, and I did get more pins from Sandbaggy, and they came promptly and are really good. They have worked really, really well so far all season, so that's what I'm going to use. I'm waiting on these guys to get ripe. They're pretty close. There's still a little bit of green on them, but the stems are getting harder, and I'll be able to harvest those pretty soon. And here's some of the original pumpkins that I haven't pruned or removed yet, and you can see there is some bug damage, some powdery mildew through there. They're looking pretty rough, so like I said, I'm going to take these down to the healthy green bits, and if they make it, swell. If they don't, they don't. I won't lose anything. The melon patch is looking pretty good. It's got a lot of melons in it, and I don't see a lot of bug damage or powdery mildew in there. I may need to prune a little bit here and there, but overall I'm really not going to mess with it too much because it seems to be doing just fine. It is crawling over into the pumpkins, and it's taken over the space between the patches, what was supposed to be a space. And I haven't harvested any of those melons yet, but they're coming along. I've got a cantaloupe over there that's pretty good size. I'll show you that in a minute. But after I get done with this pumpkin patch, if in a couple of days it looks like they're not going to do much, or if they start dying back, I'll just pull everything out and replant something here for fall. Let's just stick you in the ground so you'll root. And we'll cut off the bad bits. I did this with one down on the other end. It seems to be taking off. And that was one of the original vines. Some of these are so twisty, it's hard to tell what belongs to which vine. And as an experiment, I planted this melon or gourd, or honestly I don't remember what it is, but it's finally taken off in there in the raised bed. I wasn't sure how they would do, so I just planted them everywhere, and this one seems to be doing well. Since it was planted so late, I think it was planted in the middle of June, whereas the other things were planted around May 10th, then yeah, it doesn't seem to have any bug issues, and it doesn't seem to have any powdery mildew issues either, which is great. So I took out the 2 poquito vines that were up here. They had stopped producing and were dying back. So now the tomatillos have room to sprawl even more. I really didn't remember how much these things sprawled out, so it had been 20 plus years since I'd grown any. So next year I will have to plan accordingly and maybe give them a whole section of the garden for themselves. This is only 3 plants, and it's taken up a good bit of space. They have been producing pretty well, although I have not had enough at one time to do any canning with them. I want to make some green salsa, but I'll hang on to the ones that I've harvested and wait for these. It's still blooming like crazy, so I think it'll keep producing for quite a while. It does have a few bug bites, but it's looking pretty healthy. The cucumbers are dying back. The cantaloupe seem to be going strong though. There are loads and loads of green ones in there. And they're different sizes too, which is nice because then I won't have to harvest them all at the same time and figure out what to do with 15 cantaloupes all at once. These are the honey bear acorn squash, and I did have to take one of them out because the vine borer got it. But it's looking good, and it is producing several squash. This is the one I said I was going to not bother with if it only produced one, but it is making more, and the leaves look good. I did find quite a few squash bug eggs in there, but squished them. So we'll let her run, and we'll find out how much she will produce. Those are some of the green squash coming right along. My helper quit on me. She decided she needed to take a nap. I want to show y'all this lemon tree. It's really grown a lot over the summer, and I'm hoping that I can overwinter it again. I may need to top it if it gets too tall, but it's growing really well. It's branching out, and I'm really hopeful that someday I might get a lemon off of it. Down here is the 2nd year chili pepper. This is the one that I had overwintering in the house last winter. It's got several blooms on it, it's got several small peppers on it, and it's actually making a proper chili pepper. So that experiment actually went pretty well, and since my chili pepper plants this year that I started from seed really didn't grow well at all, I'm going to try and get third year out of that one. So come fall, come the colder temperatures, I'm going to take it back in the house, see if it'll survive another winter in the house, and if so, what it'll turn into. This purple basil that my neighbor gave me is doing great. I put this one in a pot, and I have some in another pot, a bigger pot down in the main garden area, but this one has really grown a lot. And there's my ginger. Those are roots that I planted that I got at the grocery store. I planted about 6 and only 2 have grown, but 2 is better than none. And of course, even though old grumpy uncle is gone, I still have my trusty garden helper, Miss Tiff. She has been with us for 2.5 years, and we actually adopted her when my old guy Merlin, when his brother died, to keep him from being all alone, and she really rejuvenated him and helped him out a lot, so we're grateful to her for that. I do wish she'd stop digging in the garden though. The celeriac has grown quite a bit, and I'm still not quite sure when to harvest it, but the leaves are dying back, so if we treat it as a root crop, then I think I'll probably dig up a couple of those pretty soon and see what's happening there. And there's my begonia that I overwintered and cut off a whole bunch of starts from and left the stem outside, thought it froze twice, and it's come back. That's a nice touch of color on the patio. And the catnip is looking pretty rough. It did bloom. It is going to seed. You can probably tell that somebody's been rolling around in there. Don't know who that would have been, do you? Mm-hmm. But I have scattered the seeds out, and I'm sure it'll come back next year. I'm not worried about it. It is in the mint family, so now that I've got it, I probably won't ever be able to get rid of it. For an update on the melon patch. Have a couple of really big Amish melons in there. And a few Kajari melons, you can see that down at the bottom right. There are more in there, but they're covered up with the vines. And since the bees and the flies are working, I don't want to get in there poking around and bother them. There's a good sized melon right there. Those are a couple of the vine peaches, also called mango melons, and I don't really know why, because to me they tasted more like a pear than a mango or a peach. But they're pretty tasty, and the vine has been pretty productive. I've harvested maybe 4 or 5 of them so far, and I have been watching them every day. These might be a little overripe. They're starting to split a little bit. We have had a lot of rain lately, so that might be part of it. But I'll stick them in my pocket. That one is a good size. There's another one next to it that's also a good size. I do have one little weirdo in there, though. This one is a very odd shape. Now here's the update on the pumpkin patch after I came in and pruned it so excessively. I did end up pulling out a few plants. And I have harvested the pumpkins that were there. I do see one more green one that's just come onto a plant toward this end of the bed. And the vine on the end is still looking pretty strong, so I've left it, but you can see that the melons have run across the grass into the second bed. And they're just going kind of crazy with all kinds of blooms. And the vines just get longer and longer. Those are the Amish melon vines, I think. Everything is kind of all run together at this point, so I can only tell by the fruit, but that's okay. One of my goals for this year, which, as y'all may remember, is the year of discovery, was to see whether or not melons would grow well down here in this wet area. This is the flat part at the bottom of the hill that stays wet after it rains, and the answer is yes, melons do very well down here. Now I just have to decide which ones I want to grow next year. But that's for another plan and another video. These wild tomatoes over here are still blooming. Still producing a lot of cherry tomatoes, yellow pears. There are some beefsteak tomatoes in there, but I still have not gotten a ripe tomato out of there. And the Get Stuffed is also in there. The one that's supposed to have very little gel and seeds in it, but I have yet to get one of those either. These plants still look pretty healthy though, so I'm going to leave them and let them do their thing. The lemon squash have finally started to die back. They have got powdery mildew at this point, and I have found a few squash bugs on them. However, I'm going to let them go for a little while longer. They are still blooming. They do still have a couple green squash on them. I did harvest the seed squash that I was saving from the lemon squash and the round zucchini, and I have taken it out, as you can see. I planted golden beets here after I worked the bed a little bit, and I saw a couple of sprouts this morning, but they've just been planted a couple of days, so I'm not expecting anything right away. I do like beets. And the tomatillos, in spite of the watermelon crawling into its space, have continued to do well. I've harvested a few here and there, and I did make a batch of green salsa the other day. I think I had 3 pints. And then I did some green tomato salsa because although my pruning job did extend the life of some of these tomato plants, a lot of them really need to go. I've already pulled out a couple of the sweet cherry tomatoes and the yellow pear tomatoes that were down here on the end, and I'm working on getting that cleaned up. You can see the red curry squash, which only has 1 squash on it so far, and it's not looking too healthy, is running, and it's kind of trying to take over. This does present something of a dilemma because I wanted to be able to work up the ground, clean it up, get all the weeds out, check the cardboard, see what it's doing, all of that. And then build up some rows or some little beds like I put the beets in, so that I could plant some root veggies like turnips, maybe more beets, radishes, you know, typical fall things, maybe some greens, spinach, kale. But if the squash and the watermelon and the pumpkin is still going to come over here and take over, I'm not sure how that's going to work. I want to be able to time it so that when those vines come out, then I'll just have the little plants, but I have to do a little more thinking on that and try and figure out what tomatoes need to go right now and which ones can stay a little longer. The pumpkin vine and the sweet potatoes are doing okay. The sweet potatoes are actually doing fine. The pumpkin is starting to show some signs of disease, and I'm not sure how many more fruits it's going to make. I did harvest the one, and I think it has one or two on it that are still growing, so I need to actually trace these vines and see which ones belong to which plant, because I have more than one type back here. I also have some squash and my little gourd vine. I know I overplanted for the space that I had, but I really had no idea how much these pumpkins were going to run. I knew the gourds would vine out quite a bit, but they are small. The gourd plant is this one right here that is coming from over there, and it is fairly small leaved. That's the one that has the cute little dancing spinner gourds on it. And so that one has to stay until the frost, because the gourds won't be ready to harvest until the frost kills the vine off, or the vine dies, whichever comes first. That Cherokee Tan, or butternut cross with a Cherokee Tan, or whatever that thing is coming through the tomatoes and around the tomatoes. Yes, that's the same vine. It goes all the way across the tomato patch and back around. If I plant the seeds next year, and I do want to, just to see what I get, because a year of discovery will likely be every year in the garden, as we know. I am going to have to give this thing, like the entire pumpkin patch, and just let it run, and then figure out where I'm going to put any other pumpkins that I want to grow. And that is the Rosella that is still producing quite a few tomatoes. This Juliet on the end here can also stay. Actually, the tomatoes down here on this end look a lot better. In spite of the extreme pruning I did, they have actually bounced back much better than the other ones down on the other end. So I'm probably going to clean out the bottom half of the tomato patch and work it up to plant something else there for fall. And yes, I do have a lot of weeds, and I'm going to work on that. The rooted sucker, if you can see it among the weeds there that have crept out from under the cardboard, is okay. It's not growing very quickly. I may have waited too late to plant a second bunch of tomatoes, and I think if I do plant a second round of tomatoes next year, I'm just going to start some plants from seeds, because these suckers, in spite of having really good roots when I set them out, don't seem to be doing a whole lot. And I do see some signs of blight on them, even though I cut the suckers off well before the blight turned up. So yeah. And there's the pumpkin growing in between the rows. Over there I have planted kohlrabi, and you can see why my sprouts might be having a hard time. Daikon radishes are up. Over here I planted some pak choi. I've never grown that before, but anything that tastes like cabbage or broccoli, things of that nature, I really like, so I'm hoping that this will be the green I can finally grow. I've not had very good luck with my spinach, my kale. Even the chard hasn't grown the way I expected it to, so I'm going to try various things this fall and see which ones work better. I actually do have one little sprout there. The yard-long beans are starting to die off, and they're still producing, but I've noticed a lot of aphids and ants. And in spite of informing the ants that they cannot farm in my garden, they're still doing it, so I'm going to have to spray again. Here's the cucumber trellis. I took out the cucumbers, as y'all may remember. And in order to test my germination rate on the saved bean seeds that I had, I planted some more. And they came up. Almost all of them came up. I figured instead of doing them in the paper towel or the little cup, testing them and seeing if they sprout and then throwing those away, why not just go ahead and plant them in the ground in their normal growing conditions and see what they do. And they are doing all right. I did actually find a few of the beans when I was shelling the pods to get the seeds that they had already started to put out a root inside the pods, so I planted those too. The corn is still pitiful. I pulled out all that really short stuff and planted chard in through here, and you can see I still have some cardboard I need to flatten and put out, but this is where I put the chard, and by the time it is up and growing well, these watermelons will probably be on their way out. This is the Moon and Stars. It has lots of blooms and a few baby melons. This sugar baby over here is showing some signs of distress and disease. I've harvested 5 of these, and they're a good size for individual eating, and the flavor's pretty good, but if you don't like a very seedy watermelon, you probably wouldn't care for this one because it does have a lot of seeds, which I'm saving, of course. That cayenne pepper is loaded down. The Atris peppers have quite a few on them too. None of them have gotten ripe yet though. The bell peppers are producing well. And the melon that I planted at the last minute up here in the raised bed has finally taken off and is starting to grow well. It has already spilled out of the bed and is heading for ground cover. That's one of the new plantings, the late plantings. I think that's the jelly melon, the Kiwano, which I have not found down in the melon bed where I planted it originally. So I don't know whether it just takes a long time and I'm not recognizing the vine because it doesn't have any fruit, or if it didn't do well. So this is round 2, and we're gonna see if this makes anything. I am curious about the fruits. And the okra is getting taller and producing. It actually does take me a couple, 3 days to get a big enough mess to fix, but that's alright because I don't need to be eating fried food every day. It's still pretty tasty. And I have left about 6 pods on the bottom of those to save for seeds, and also to see if I can come up with the longest pod for the Samson Okra Challenge. And that is my single seed challenge. That poor old pitiful kohlrabi.